as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question.
That's two questions, actually. That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday, for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
And this is The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, on your TV and your radio. Today we'll be talking about the PM's trip to India, the week ahead in Westminster, Justin Welby's words, and we'll be talking with a Ukrainian MP on the latest in that country. Join me all after the morning news.
Thanks, Tom. Good morning. It is 9:30. I'm Rosie Wright, here to keep you up to date on GB News. Now, the Home Secretary says critics of her plans to send migrants to Rwanda have failed to offer their own solutions. Well, she's written a joint article in The Times with the Rwandan Foreign Minister, and Priti Patel reiterated that her controversial plans were bold and innovative. It's after the leader of the Church of England, Justin Welby, said the proposals were ungodly and raised serious ethical questions. Boris Johnson is said to be getting ready to defend his premiership in front of Parliament this week. The Prime Minister's due to make a statement in the Commons once MPs return to Westminster after the Easter recess. He's expected to urge MPs to move on from Partygate and insists there are now bigger issues to focus on. The final COVID restrictions in Scotland are being lifted today. People will no longer legally have to wear masks on public transport and in most indoor places, as the rule now moves to guidance only. Well, meanwhile, people with no symptoms of the virus will no longer have to take regular lateral flow tests. Ukrainian authorities are reporting multiple explosions in the western and southern regions of Lviv and Dnipro. Lviv's mayor says at least 6 people have been killed and 8 have been wounded after 5 missile strikes hit the city. In the UK, volunteers are being lined up to drive ambulances as part of a pilot scheme due to launch next month. London Ambulance Service says volunteers will be trained and equipped to offer support to emergency calls in their area. It comes as new figures last week show response times and A&E performance in England has dropped to its lowest level on record. You're up to date now. We're on your TV, online and DAB+ radio. You're watching GB News, and now it's back to Tom for this morning's briefing.
A very good morning to you. It's 9:33 and this is The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, on your TV and on your radio. Now, first this week, the Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, will make his long-delayed trip to India in what will be his first visit to the country since becoming Prime Minister in 2019. The PM will meet with Narendra Modi, the Indian Prime Minister, in New Delhi on Friday, with talks set to be focused on defence, security and on trade. He's also expected to seek a new collaboration between the UK and India on health, science and technology, including a major investment announcement. Well, exactly what could that involve? Joining me to discuss this now is freelance journalist with The Times of India, Naomi Canton. Welcome to the programme, Naomi. This has been a very long time coming. There was talk about an early India trip. It got delayed by COVID. It got delayed again by what was then called the India variant. Finally, 3 years later, this trip is coming about. What can we expect from it?
Well, it's interesting. He's going to Gujarat on Thursday and then Delhi on Friday. And in going to Gujarat's quite a significant move on his part, because that's obviously Narendra Modi's home state. And it's also where a large number of the British Indian diaspora come from. So I think that the FTA is progressing extremely well, and there's every chance it could get agreed by the end of this year. So I think we're going to see a big announcement on the progression of the trade agreement, and there's also likely to be a big announcement on a defence partnership between the UK and India.
That's interesting because whilst the UK has been very keen for a trade agreement, a full free trade agreement with India, we had been hearing that it would be more limited in scope, that it might not be the full comprehensive kind of free trade agreement that we're securing with Australia, with New Zealand, potentially with Canada as well. This might be a more limited set of provisions, mainly because there's a bit of a disagreement between what India wants on migration and what the UK is willing to accept.
That's not what I'm hearing. So I'm hearing that this is going to be a very comprehensive free trade agreement, and it is going extremely well, speeding ahead. It could get agreed within a year because, of course, negotiations started in January. And I think that the UK will make some concessions on migration as well. And the UK, of course, wants to return illegal immigrants to India, and India is looking for greater concessions. But I think after Brexit, the UK welcomes Indian immigrants because, on the whole, they're highly skilled. I don't foresee any. I think it's going to be a very big agreement.
That's really interesting because, of course, this was one of the great prizes that Brexiteers spoke of, opening up the United Kingdom's trade horizons, expanding those to the wider world. India, of course, a growing, emerging superpower, one of 1 billion people. However, the UK and India have not always seen exactly eye to eye, and a sticking point this week might be on Ukraine. India's taken a more neutral stance than many were hoping for on the issue of Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine. Might this be a sticking point?
It's definitely going to be a sticking point. It's a huge divergence between the two countries' foreign policies, and Boris Johnson's definitely going to raise it, and India's going to be prepared with an answer. India is... We saw how they reacted when Liz Truss visited recently, and also Secretary Blinken from the USA. India is not going to change stance on Russia at the moment. Russia is an old ally of India, going back decades. There's a lot of closeness between Russian people and India. There's a lot of exchange. They do university exchanges. There's loads of Russian tourists in India. There's a place in Goa called Little Russia. The Bollywood industry is extremely popular in Russia. And the cultural mindset is kind of pro-Russia. It's very, very different to here, where we were sort of brought up to not really like Russia and sort of see Russia as an enemy. It's just not like that in India. And they also, the Indian government, most of their military equipment is Russian, and they can't just overnight switch to another country because they need product support from Russia, and they need to, they need spare parts and things like that. But having said that, India is open to, striking defence deals with any country that will help India implement its Make in India program, which is basically trying to make the products in India.
Yes, it's interesting looking at potentially the political disagreements within India, because, of course, back when the Congress Party was in power, they were seen to be really quite close to Russia historically, and the Soviet Union, of course, before then. The fact that Narendra Modi comes from a different political tradition, his centre-right BJP, might the political differences between Narendra Modi's party and the Congress Party that used to be in power, might that be somewhat of a wedge to drive India closer to the West, or is that the wrong end of the stick?
Actually, when it's been discussed in Parliament in India, they've actually been unified, the Congress and the BJP, on the stance towards Russia at the moment and the foreign policy. Having said that, the benefit that the BJP has brought with UK-India relations is this FTA. because traditionally India didn't sign FTAs, and this is a really new direction for India, and they have recently signed one with Australia. But when it comes to the Ukraine issue, I think that there obviously are some people in India that are against the current stance, and they are more pro-Ukraine and want India to condemn Russia. But the majority are still very pro-Russia. I think India's trying to be non-aligned. It's actually not trying to take one side or the other, which is why it's abstaining on all the votes. And it did actually abstain on 2 votes at the UN, which were they were actually against Russia, or not in Russia's favour.
That's really, really interesting. It will be a fascinating week. It will be really interesting to see whether that free trade agreement negotiation does progress and whether Ukraine ends up being a sticking point or if some agreement can be reached there. We'll be watching it very closely. But for now, Naomi Canton, freelance journalist with The Times of India, thank you very much for joining us here on The Briefing. Well, moving on now, the Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, has caused a political stir this week after he told his congregation that the United Kingdom has a duty as a, quote, Christian country to not subtract our responsibilities during this Easter sermon. The Archbishop said that the serious ethical questions over sending asylum seekers abroad cannot stand the judgment of God. Well, was this too political for the head of the established Church of England to be wading in on? Joining us now to discuss this further is Tim Dieppe, head of public policy at Christian Concern. Welcome to the programme. Should the Archbishop of Canterbury be getting involved in such political issues?
Yeah, Tom, so I find myself quite often wishing that the Archbishop of Canterbury would speak more clearly the Christian message and the uniqueness of the Christian message. But of course, the Christian message does include saying that some things are wrong and that we all need forgiveness for those things. So I quite often wish he would speak out more clearly on some of the other moral issues of our day, like transgenderism or abortion or sexual morality and various issues like that. Certainly he has a right to speak out on political issues because all political issues at the end of the day are moral issues. And so he has a right to speak out on this. Whether I agree with him or not, I'm not sure because, I have some sympathy with Priti Patel saying, well, what is your alternative, Justin Welby? Here's our plan. We think it will save lives. We think it will reduce child migrants, which means saving lives, and enable us to focus on the more genuine asylum seekers. And both of those, saving lives and focusing on asylum seekers, are Christian moral imperatives. So I wonder with Priti Patel what Justin Welby's alternative is, but certainly I think he has a right to speak out on the political and moral issues of our day. And the question for the nation is, where do we get our moral values from if we're not getting it from Christianity?
Is there a problem here in that Justin Welby is head of the established church, of the state religion, and that to some extent that carries a greater responsibility to speak not quite for the country, but certainly with the country? It might be easier to see the heads of non-established churches wading into political issues and contentious matters of the day. Does the Church of England specifically carry a special responsibility here?
Yes, it does. But, it's not a state church. It's an established church, not a state church. But a slight difference there. And that means it certainly has the right to criticise government policy when he thinks that it's wrong. And I think that's fair enough. He has the right to do that. And people can choose to listen or not. He doesn't have an authority to say, you must not do this and cannot do this. But he can say, I think this is against what God would do. Like many others, I'm questioning, well, what is the alternative then? The current plan obviously isn't working and is causing a risk to lots of people, and meaning we're not focusing on proper asylum seekers. So the government's tried to come up with another plan. I'm not convinced that is the right plan either. But I think we should be hesitant to criticise it without coming up with some alternative. At least the government's come up with a plan that it thinks will work. But, Welby's totally within his rights to step in and try and bring a moral dimension and try and say, let's look at what the Christian moral values are in this. And I'm pleased that he's doing it in that sense, even while I'm not sure that I agree entirely with his position.
I'm fascinated by how the Church of England is behaving on issues like this compared to, for example, the more religious politics that we might see in the United States of America. It seems that religion has not always played a large role in our politics in the United Kingdom, but perhaps by virtue of having an established church. Is there a bit of an inverse relationship to what we might see in the United States of America? Is religious politics a greater purview of those on the left in the United Kingdom and on the right in the United States?
The left and the right in the United States. Maybe. I mean, certainly there's religious traditions on both sides, on both the left and the right, I think, in Britain. And both of them are trying to bring Christian, or were historically trying to bring Christian morality to bear on the issues of the day. Certainly we're a less polarised society than America, although going more polarised, it seems to me, in terms of the right and the left. And I hope we don't become as polarised as America is. Certainly, I think that the established church, perhaps has meant that we've had, in some ways, less religious involvement in politics in a kind of, odd way like that. And whereas in America, where there's a very clear separation of church and state that people always look to, that does mean that the churches themselves have to fend for themselves. There's no support from the government there, and therefore perhaps they're more courageous and speak out more boldly about the gospel and about moral imperatives. And I wish the church did have a stronger voice in that sense. But I'd rather we spoke out more boldly about the uniqueness of Christianity and some of the other moral pressing issues of the day as well.
Famously, Tony Blair said, or is supposed to have said, we don't do God when it comes to politics in this country. Should party leaders be doing God in the way that, for example, Boris Johnson and Keir Starmer both posted Easter messages yesterday?
Well, I suppose the question back to that is should Christians or Muslims or others have to keep their faith private and avoid mentioning it and avoid saying where they get the moral values from? Actually, wouldn't it be better if we did explain where we get our moral values from and explain what we're motivated by and why we think what's right and why we think what's wrong? And isn't that a good thing for the country to say, I believe I'm doing this because in conscience I think this is right, I think this is what the Bible says, or I think this is what the Jewish scriptures say, or what the Islamic scriptures say, or whatever, and then we're all clear, and then we know who we're voting for, and then we know what we're getting. So I want to resist this attempt to sort of privatise religion and say that religion has no role in politics, because surely religion does have a role in politics, and those who are religious ought to be able to be open about it and explain it and say it, and not sort of shy away and say God's got nothing to do with it. If there's a God, clearly he speaks into the moral issues of the day, and let's appeal to that as well. And also, if there's no God, then we've got no moral authority to appeal to say, hang on a minute, the state's wrong about this. Surely we must be able to appeal to God in order to criticise the state. Otherwise, we've got no external authority to appeal to about it.
Well, it's a fascinating issue and one that we don't often talk about at the forefront of our politics. But Tim, thank you so much for joining us and talking through those issues there for us now. Thank you for joining us here on The Briefing. Now, moving on to matters of foreign policy. After just under 3 weeks of parliamentary recess, tomorrow the House is scheduled to return from the Easter break. Of course, I'm talking about domestic policy now. The Prime Minister and his government will be bracing themselves as they're set to face questions about Partygate, fixed penalty notices, the cost of living and the contentious Rwandan deal. The Prime Minister is speaking in a statement tomorrow. Well, what will he be saying? Let's talk now with The Sun's political and environment correspondent, Natasha Clark. Welcome to the programme, Natasha. First of all, I suppose this has been an almost a relatively fortunate Prime Minister in a funny sort of way, that the big crises happened when all MPs were back in their constituencies.
Yes, absolutely. It was almost a week ago that we got the news that the Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, had been given a coronavirus fine for alleged breach of lockdown laws, along with Rishi Sunak, along with the PM's wife, Carrie, as well. So obviously sent Westminster into a bit of a flurry. But as you know, Tom, reporting in Westminster for many years, there's not quite the momentum to keep it up when Parliament is not sitting. So obviously we were all on our Easter break. So the Prime Minister was working from Chequers at the time, did a statement to camera, and then sort of hoped that the whole thing would sort of brush over. So he has been locked up in his country retreat in Buckinghamshire at Chequers, sort of planning out what his next steps and what he's going to do. So we're going back to the Commons tomorrow, so Tuesday. So we're expecting the Prime Minister to come to the House of Commons to make a statement to MPs to talk about this and to face their furious questions about the fine that he's faced.
That this appears to be a sort of amalgamated statement. The Labour MP Chris Bryant this morning saying that it would be a disgrace if the Prime Minister tried to sort of mush together both a statement on Ukraine, a statement on refugees, a statement on the cost of living, and indeed a statement on his Partygate fine. Might this be a tactic from the Prime Minister to try and move the conversation on, to try and present a business as usual front?
Well, from what we understand, the Prime Minister is going to say tomorrow he's apparently going to apologise to MPs. He's going to show that he understands the depth of feeling and the anger that is at him at the moment from both his MPs and from the public. And then he is going to talk about that he needs to be now let to get on to do the day job. Obviously, as you mentioned, the Prime Minister has been in a way lucky. He's had a foreign crisis to deal with, and that's Boris Johnson at his strongest. He loves dealing with these sort of issues where he can really be on the front foot and show his sort of toughness and tenacity and his sort of friendship with President Zelensky, who he's been trying to sort of show that with for many weeks and months, and showing he is right behind him and right there with him. But yes, the problems at home are not going away. The people go to the polls in the local elections in just a few weeks' time, and obviously the cost of living crisis has begun to bite. Bills have gone up, and like you say, this Partygate fine isn't going away anytime soon. And obviously we know that there are more to come as well. The Metropolitan Police have not finished their investigation. There is a possibility that Prime Minister might face more than one fine at the end of the day. He's going to have to come back to MPs and say, look, I know that this has happened. I am sorry. There is a possibility that more fines might come down the line, but who else are you going to replace me with at this time? We're in a war with Ukraine. Is this really the time to be going into a Tory leadership election right now?
And yet suggestions in the papers this morning that the Prime Minister doesn't believe he did anything wrong. I have to say, these are suggestions that I'm inclined to believe, given that this particular event, the one that has had the single fine issued for so far, was one that Number 10 actually briefed out into the press at the time that it happened back in June 2020. If the Prime Minister believes that he did nothing wrong, would he be wise to say that in Parliament? Or what's the dynamic here? What is the Prime Minister's best path to win over Conservative MPs? To be as contrite as possible, or to say, I genuinely did not know I was doing something wrong?
Obviously, this has been such a grey area for coronavirus fines, and obviously the legislation was rushed through in such a quick way when it was drafted up that there have been lots of these grey areas. What we do know is, the Prime Minister sort of said this in his Chequers statement last week when he was speaking to broadcasters, that he thought at the time that he wasn't doing anything wrong by gathering quickly, with people that he would meet every day anyway in the cabinet room for a happy birthday. That's his argument, is that he did not think that was breaking the rules. Obviously, he's now going to face questions from MPs about whether he misled Parliament about that. I think that's really going to dominate the week. MPs are going to say, when you said there were no parties, when you said there were no gatherings, did you really mean that? Did you understand that what you attended may have been considered to be a gathering? And obviously the Metropolitan Police have taken that view, that some of the rules were broken in Downing Street. So it's going to be pretty tricky for him to sort of set that path. But equally, a lot of his MPs are on his side. They say that he should not have been fined in this way, privately behind the scenes, of course, that he should not have been fined for what they consider is to be a very minor breach of the rules. And like you say, people that he's meeting with every day, having meetings with, it was a very short, whatever it was in the cabinet room. That's going to be his argument in order to sort of go through this. And let's not forget,
clearly a big surprise for the Chancellor as well, given that this was someone we understand that did not expect he would get a fine at all. I wonder, just in the context of this very low bar for fines that seems to have been established, how does Nicola Sturgeon's face mask slip-up play into this now? Clearly a bit of ammunition for the Tory benches.
Absolutely, yes. Last night we saw there was footage of Nicola Sturgeon being seen without a mask in East Kilbride. Obviously, she's been very tough on lockdown laws. She's been very tough on face mask rules. They've been in place in Scotland for far longer than they have in any other part of the rest of the United Kingdom. This is going to be really embarrassing for her. Her aides, the SNP, are saying she really quickly realised, and then she put her mask back on as soon as she realised that she didn't have it on. But I think this will, like you say, be ammunition for her critics, and they will be saying, look how easy it is to accidentally break lockdown laws.
I wonder if there would be a fine potentially from Police Scotland over that. I suppose we'll need to wait and see. But for now, Natasha Clark, political and environment correspondent for The Sun, thanks so much for joining us this morning on The Briefing. Now, Easter is one of those most important celebrations in the Christian calendar, and away from the chocolate eggs, many people use it as a time for reflection. Our reporter Anna Riley has been speaking to the Archbishop of York about what Easter means to him.
Easter is central to the Christian faith and offers a message of new beginnings, as well as being a time for family, friends, rest and relaxation. The Archbishop of York, Stephen Cottrell, leads the Northern Province of the Church of England. At York Minster, Stephen shared his Easter message of hope and rebirth, and his belief that with the ongoing war in Ukraine and a cost of living crisis, that the meaning of Easter is relevant now more than ever.
There is such horrors in our world. We've lived through 2 years of COVID. We're just coming out of it. And then we see, for the first time in most of our lifetimes, something we thought we would never see, war in Europe. The terrible, terrible invasion of Ukraine and all that's followed from that. We're seeing a cost of living crisis in our own country. There is a refugee crisis across the world. There is a climate emergency. These are huge things, and it's very, very easy to feel hopeless. The message of Easter, again, is a message that there is hope, that these things don't have the last word, that it's possible to live differently, to start again. And therefore I hope and pray that the message of Easter will speak into all these situations. First of all, for those in the greatest need and the greatest despair, knowing they're not alone, but for all of us to raise our sights and lift our vision.
The Archbishop thinks this is the point for Britain and the world to come together to support one another through dark times.
I want to live in a world where everyone has a decent wage and a decent income, and I'm really, really concerned for the poorest in our society, let alone across the world. And then, of course, I want to live in a country, I think we all do actually. It's amazing how British people want to welcome in Ukrainian refugees. There's been a huge outpouring of goodwill and welcome. That's good. I want to live in that sort of a country. But there are refugees from Yemen, refugees from Syria, in just as much need, fleeing similar conflict and violence. This could be a great wake-up call for our nation, in which we reset our compass to be better than we are at the moment.
And this is what people visiting York Minster said the meaning of Easter is for them.
Chance to start over, I think. A bit like a clean slate. And everybody does New Year resolutions, but I think Easter's the time when you just think about what could have been, what might have been, and how you can make it better.
It's a time when the church really comes together to celebrate the resurrection.
Time off from regular routine.
It's a kind of a renewal, kind of a spiritual spring to me. Just trying to get back to spiritual beliefs and start over, and start the year afresh.
It's about life, resurrection, new hope.
So, however you've spent the Easter break, here at the Minster there's a message of hope and unity for whatever the future may bring. Anna Riley, GB News, York.
Thanks to Anna for that. That's it for the programme. Coming up, it's To The Point, but first, here's the weather.
Last day of the bank holiday. Looking ahead, it's looking bright for many of us. A mix of sunshine and scattered showers. Let's look in the southwest, and we're going to see a mixture of sunny spells and scattered showers throughout Easter Monday morning. It's feeling fresher though. Temperatures around 13 degrees Celsius. Let's head over to the capital. There's going to be plenty of sunshine and dry weather for the London area and southeast England, with temperatures reaching about 14 Celsius by lunchtime. Let's head over to Wales. There's going to be a mixture of sunny spells and showers. They could be quite heavy towards the coast, feeling pleasant in the sunshine. In the Midlands, it's going to be mostly dry, but there are a few light showers possible, mainly to the north of Birmingham. Temperatures rising a little above average for the time of year.
Showers for northern England. Let's head there this morning too, on the heavy side from time to time. In between, there will be plenty of sunshine, feeling pleasant with light winds. Meanwhile, in Scotland, Orkney and Shetland, we'll see some early rain. Otherwise, much of the country will be bright with sunshine and showers. Breezy in the north and west, and in Northern Ireland, a brighter day compared to yesterday. There will be plenty of sunny spells, but also the risk of some showers too. Highs of around 12 degrees Celsius.
So through the day, most places are going to stay bright, but there will be some further scattered showers possible. And as we said, breezy in the northwest. That's how the weather's shaping up today.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question.
That's two questions, actually. That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.